Hey everyone, it's Ellie.
And Tara.
And welcome to another 180 Shift sort of podcast sort of moment. We're in a different place. Tara, tell us why we are here.
Yes, we are going to be interviewing Nathan Hochman today, who is up against George Gascon for district attorney in California.
Los Angeles, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So we are going to have him here, but thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a very busy schedule on the campaign trail, but we did bring you some boba. So just why don't we start off by, I guess, doing this really cool thing. This is sort of a gift from Gen Z. This is what we all love to do. So let's see. There you go.
Thank you.
Yummy.
Very good.
Okay. Well, I guess we can get into it. So why don't we just start off with going into your background, so your history, schooling, work, all that stuff.
Great. And thank you very much for having me on. So I'm a lifelong Angelino. I was born here, grew up here, educated here. I'm now married 31 years, and I raised my three kids here who are now in their 20s. It's part of the reason I'm running for district attorney is that I've watched where LA's public safety has gone under our current district attorney, George Gascon. And we can go into it in great detail, but the nicest thing I can say is it's gone the wrong direction. People feel less safe. In fact, 2/3 of Los Angelinos polled feel less safe today than they did when George Gascon came into office in 2020. So basically, people have had one of three reactions to what's going on. One reaction is to just leave LA County, and they vote with their feet. And it wasn't the high taxes, the traffic, the smog, the earthquakes. You had fear. The fear to go outside, the fear to go to a park, to a restaurant, the fear to go to a subway, a beach. You add that for yourself, your families, and people have left. Second reaction to it is just complain. Everybody knows everybody who complains from the sidelines. And the third reaction is to actually do something about it. I have a fairly unique skill set that gives me a chance to be an effective DA because after I grew up here, went to Brown University, Stanford Law School, came back to LA, clerked for a federal judge, then went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office. When I was there for 7 years as a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted everything from narcotics traffickers and violent gang members to international money launderers. I ran the environmental crime section and went after air, sea, and land polluters. I then had a chance to go after government fraud and public corruption defendants, including corrupt public officials and corrupt cops. 10 years after that, I got a presidential nomination, a unanimous U.S. Senate confirmation to run the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division. It's a $100 million budget, 350 lawyers. I went back to D.C. to do it and did that for about 14 months. After that, I came back to L.A., rejoined my family, and had the chance to head up two major international law firms' government investigations practices, and along the way was the president of the LA City Ethics Commission and the co-founder of the LA Sheriff's Foundation. And the reason I give you my background is that I think it's important that a DA, a district attorney of LA County, which is the largest local municipal law enforcement organization in the entire country, if not the world. I mean, it's got a $460 million budget. It does 180,000 criminal cases every year. It's got 2,100 people working for it, including 750 prosecutors. So you should expect that your DA is qualified to actually do the job. And I'll take my 34 years of criminal justice experience prosecuting hundreds or defending hundreds of cases over George Gascon's experience, which is zero. And that's shocking because he's never actually prosecuted or defended a criminal case his entire life.
No, that's interesting. Now, I just want to take a step back and ask you why you got into law. What drove you into pursuing that?
My dad was a lawyer. He was a lawyer for 50 years, and he loved being a lawyer. There's some lawyers who go to law school, can't stand it. He loved standing in front of a judge or a jury or dealing with clients and solving their problems. In fact, he liked the definition of instead of lawyer or attorney, he liked counselor, because he actually viewed himself as a counselor to help people solve their problems wherever those problems showed up, inside or outside of a courtroom. And that's the example that I grew up with. I actually got to work with my dad before he passed. He had a law firm, his own law firm, for about 50 years after he was a federal prosecutor. And, it it was amazing. I mean, the clients really put their trust, their lives in your hands, and you're all it's between them and sometimes losing everything they've ever had. And so it's a great responsibility, but it's incredibly rewarding profession.
Now, talking about rewarding, what is the most proudest case that you've been able to work on?
It's interesting. On the prosecution side, I worked on a case that involved elderly victims who were being victimized by a telemarketer, basically someone who would go call them up, give them this whole line about how they had to invest in these surefire investments, get all their money, and then run away with their money. I did a whole bunch of those type of cases, and going after the people who are committing these crimes and putting them in jail, very satisfying. On the defense side, interestingly, a lot of the cases are the ones where my client was innocent, literally innocent, and sometimes it involved titanic struggles with the government. They were absolutely convinced that my client did it, and they were ready to arrest him. And in some cases, they did arrest him, and we had to vindicate their rights at trial. But being able to get a jury verdict of not guilty when the person was truly not guilty and giving them a chance to get back to their lives and relive their lives was an incredibly satisfying experience.
That sounds nice. Now, talking about the DA, what are some of the roles that you'll be playing if you get elected?
What's interesting, I've kind of looked at it as a before, during, and after role that the DA needs to play. Before is you need to get the DA's office out into the schools before people have any contact with the criminal justice system. So there's 750 deputy district attorneys. There's tens of thousands of law enforcement officers. They need to get into the elementary schools, the middle schools, and the high schools so that students actually have a chance to hear about the criminal justice system before they might be in it, either as someone who unfortunately is going through it or maybe even a victim. And they have a contact point. They understand how it works. The system will get a lot more support later on in their lives. The during is holding people accountable. And what I want to make sure people understand is what I mean by accountable. I reject extreme policies on both ends of the pendulum. Extreme policies right now of George Gascon's decarceration, which means that he lets out violent and serious offenders before they've served their full sentences, and he doesn't prosecute them to the full extent of the law, which is wrong. I think that if you predetermine without looking at the facts or the law that there are certain crimes and certain criminals that will not be prosecuted no matter what, that's wrong. But on the other end of the extreme is mass incarceration, where you do the same thing while you go the other end of the spectrum, and you say, okay, these people need to go to jail for as long as possible, no matter what the facts of the law is. Where I come down is what I call the hard middle. And the reason it's hard is it requires an individual analysis of each and every case, no more blanket policies. And you look at the defendant's background, the crime committed, the impact on the victim, to determine who the true threats are to our to our public safety and need to be behind bars, and quite honestly, the ones that aren't. The first-time nonviolent offender could very well serve their debt to society by community service, restitution if they stole something, maybe diversion programs if they have a mental illness or a substance abuse problem, and they don't need to go to prison. That's the defense attorney talking in me. I've been a defense attorney for over 20 years, a prosecutor for over 10. And so calibrating where people should end up in that spectrum of punishment is the role of the DA. And that's sort of the during. So we have the before, the during, and the after is that for the people who go to prison, they call it the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Very often that rehabilitation part is not focused on. I would focus on it because right now the statistic is horrifying that over 50% of the people who get out of prison will be back in prison within 2 years. Why? For the most part, because they don't have a skill set. They didn't learn it before they got to prison. They didn't learn it during prison. And so when they get out, they have very few options other than to get back into a life of crime if they want to provide for themselves. So I back programs like The Last Mile The website is thelastmile.org. And what it does, it teaches coding skills to prisoners while they're in prison. It's done this for hundreds of prisoners. It's got wait lists for its classes. And it's about a year-long program. They get them a coding certificate. This is like website maintenance or building out websites. Then they help them get their first job, because it's very hard if you're a convicted felon to get your first job. So they help them get their first job, and their recidivism rate, instead of 50%, is less than 1%. So before, during, and after the roles of the DA.
Well, thank you. Now I'll toss it over to Tara.
Yes, so I just wanted to share some personal experiences I've had. I've lived in the city since 2016, so I have a lot of stories. So I'll just start off with one. One time my dad saw a woman stab a man in Los Angeles, and there was no fight. My dad was having a casual conversation with outside a local restaurant with his friend, and out of nowhere, this woman came up and stabbed my dad's friend. And this woman is a complete stranger to both my dad and his friend. It was completely out of nowhere. So she ran away after stabbing him, and my dad chased the woman. And she said to him, like, "Are you a cop?" And my dad said, "No, I'm your conscience." And miraculously, she got down on the floor, put her hands up, and the cops arrived and arrested her. Now, the judge, cut to the courtroom, they were considering giving her a mental health diversion and just letting her go. So, I mean, can you explain what that is to us?
Certainly. So the mental health courts are set up to deal with not just the problems that occur, for instance, in this case, a stabbing or more often a robbery, but the reasons, the causes for it. In this case, it sounds like, serious mental illness. The mental health courts don't get used in certain cases. In other words, if the case is violent enough, and I'm surprised that a stabbing case would actually get to mental health courts, then very often that punishment won't fit the crime, because the mental health courts also don't have the ability to order someone into a lockdown mental health facility against their will. It becomes more of a voluntary situation at that point. Now, the alternative to a mental health court can often be for the person going to state prison. The problem is, if they truly are suffering from a mental health crisis, they're probably not in the best mind to make a rational decision. So for the people who are engaged in lower level crimes, let's say theft, you can often, if they're in a stable enough position where they can make rational decisions, you can bring them through the mental health court, get them back on a medicine regime if they need that, or whatever it is to get them in a stable mental health pattern. And then hopefully, if they stick with it, then that is effectively the price they're going to pay for whatever crime they've committed. And then hopefully they never commit it again. They're on probation for a while, being monitored to make sure that happens. It's not right for every crime. And I'm surprised that a stabbing crime would even get the person into a mental health diversion program. Usually violent crimes are outside that program. So the program can work and has worked. It's not appropriate for everyone. They do the same thing with drug court. So if you have a big drug addiction, for instance, and that led you to steal whatever to pay for your drug addiction, the idea is that if the threat is going to prison or dealing with your drug addiction, and the drug addiction program is an 18-month program, it requires you to be urine tested, go to AA meetings, stay clean, not engage in criminal conduct. But the hammer is that you'll go to state prison. Now, part of the problem is that we've taken that hammer away over the last 10 years with Proposition 47. There's actually a fixed Proposition 47 proposition that'll probably be on the November ballot. So if you have, in certain situations, the right mix of both punishment and opportunities to help yourself, that is often the right solution in those cases. But again, even drug court is not appropriate for certain crimes, particularly violent crimes that they commit against people.
Yeah, and miraculously, again, while she was on the stand, she started crying and apologizing, and I don't know. So she actually did end up serving time. But yeah, so Ellie, what do you
I'll jump in here. Yeah. So you're talking about we haven't seen the hammer come down in a lot of cases, and a lot of Angelenos are very upset. Sort of, I guess, seeing that it's a very lenient policy that we've had going on, and because of that, we've seen a lot of an uptick in crime. And that crime has increased in like property crime, all those types of things. But would you be willing to step away from that lenient policy that we've been seeing?
So George Gascon's policies aren't just lenient, they're extreme. And let me give you a couple examples. He has said out loud that if a juvenile, someone under 18, engages in misdemeanors, he won't prosecute the misdemeanors. But what are misdemeanors? Stealing just under $950. So it's basically a license to steal. If you're a juvenile, they won't prosecute you if you steal just under $950. He will not enforce something called the gun or gang enhancement. What is that? If you decide you want to rob someone and you think, well, should I use the gun or not use the gun? Well, you think if I use the gun, they're more likely to give me the money if I stick a gun in their face and say, give me your money. But one of the reasons you might not do it is that you'll get more time in jail. You can get years in jail by using the gun. But George Gascon has said, we will not charge that gun enhancement that'll give you that additional time. So the criminals now think, well, if I use the gun or don't use the gun, I'll get the same punishment. I might as well use the gun. And so there's been to say it's an uptick, there's been a significant increase in the use of guns because those are the rules that the DA has set forward. The same thing about the gang enhancement. Gangs are a huge problem in LA County. The state legislature gave the prosecutor a tool to increase a sentence if someone basically is part of a gang when they commit the crime, and that's a violent crime. And sure enough, George Gascon says, no, I won't go ahead and impose the gang enhancement even for people engaging in violent crimes. And the probably the other one that he's had so many issues with is something called the 3 strikes law. This goes after the worst of the worst offenders. The type of people who commit a violent or serious offense one time, get convicted, go to jail. That didn't stop them. They commit a violent and serious offense a second time, go to jail. That didn't stop them. Now they're back for the third, another violent and serious offense. George Gascon basically said, we're not going to file those type of cases anymore. I actually went to court on behalf of the 750 prosecutors that work for George Gascon to get his policy overturned, and we actually got a court to do it. So, and it's the first time probably in U.S. history that the employees, the prosecutors, went to court to get one of their bosses' policies overturned, and it actually succeeded. And the court basically said to George Gascon, you can't violate the law to try and enforce the law.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, yeah. I have another story. So my brother moved to K-Town 2 years ago, and the first day that they're there, a guy chased another guy down the street, and he was like holding something, and he was yelling at the guy who was running, "I'm not gonna kill you!" And so this scared my sister-in-law so much that her and my brother left the state. But I mean, think about how many people endure this kind of crazy behavior every day. Like it's just normal for them. I mean, is viewing criminals as victims of mental health a productive way to maintain safety in any city?
No, it actually isn't. And let me get. And by the way, your family has had some interesting experiences with the criminal justice system. But let me give you the way I would think about these situations. So there's a theory out there in the world called the broken windows theory. And here's how it works. It started in the 1970s in New York. And what was happening in New York back then is on the subways, you would have graffiti everywhere. You'd have broken turnstiles. You'd have broken windows. They would literally bang out the windows. They put plywood over it. They wouldn't even be fixed because as soon as you fix them, they would break them again. And then that led to those small crimes led to bigger crimes, and a spiral of lawlessness started to grow so that violent crimes became normalized as well. So what happened is you effectively created a culture of lawlessness where breaking the law was it wasn't a big deal anymore. So the way to reverse that is to go back to those small crimes, to basically say, okay, look, if you're engaging in illegal drug use, or you're a drug dealer and you're selling fentanyl to people, or you're stealing just under $950, or you're engaged in some of the more serious crimes, the smash and grab robbers and whatnot, we're going to treat those crimes seriously. It doesn't mean we're going to put someone in jail for 100 years. We're not doing mass incarceration. But what George Gascon has done is he said, look, I'm willing to close my eyes and pretend you didn't commit the crime. And those low-level crimes, you talk about an uptick. I mean, shoplifting's up 81%. Other property crimes, which is stealing stuff from your house or your car, those are up double digits. That's led to then violent crime being up in every single year that George Gascon's been in office compared to the year he entered office. So again, it's created this spiral of lawlessness where people think they can just get away with it, whether it's using a gun in the middle of a robbery. I mean, how often do people get arrested in the morning and they're back on the street by the afternoon? So that's a message to the criminals that, the law really isn't going to stop you. It's a message to law enforcement that the DA's office is no longer doing its job. So why go ahead and arrest these people if you know they're going to be out? It's a message to victims, and the victims are thinking, let's say a store owner, a small store owner in Koreatown, that's their family store. If someone steals $600, that's the profits for the week, maybe walking out, the profits for the day, literally walking out the door. And they're thinking to themselves, well, if I go ahead and call the police are going to say, I can't do anything about it because the DA's office is not going to prosecute it. So should they file an insurance claim? Well, the deductible for the insurance claim, which is what they have to pay, is often more than what's been stolen. So why file an insurance claim? But it gets worse than that. If they do file the insurance claim, the insurance company will then not renew their policy. Now they won't have any insurance at all. And if somehow they call the police, they call the insurance company, the person gets arrested, they're out by the afternoon. So they're looking at it and they're going, this system is not working. This is the part I need to change. I need to basically go back to those notions of accountability, not crazy, extreme mass incarceration, but hard middle accountability. Send the message that we are going to treat crimes and you're committing those crimes seriously. And then put the line out in the sand and say to people, here's the line. I'm going to consistently and fairly enforce it. Here are the consequences if you violate the line, the rules, the laws. Now, what is my goal ultimately if I'm the DA for 4 years? It is not filling the prisons to the breaking point. That's the failure of criminal justice policy. My goal is to deter criminal conduct from occurring in the first place. So that if you're a criminal and you know that this DA is going to enforce the law, you choose not to commit the crime and victimize that victim in the first place. That will be if I succeed, that will be the greatest indication of success, that crime has gone down. Fewer people are actually going to jail because crime itself has gone down.
That'd be amazing for Los Angeles, Ellie.
Mm-hmm. So not too long ago, we saw on the news a woman who was getting arrested for protecting her own home against a squatter. Although this didn't happen here in LA, it did happen in New York. But I want to know what you would do to make sure that somebody like her who was wrongfully arrested wouldn't be getting charged or anything like that.
So the issues of squatters in California is sadly a complicated issue. Because if a squatter is there, I think it's more than 30 days, they actually acquire certain rights under California law that both the police and the homeowners have to respect, and then ultimately go to court to get these people evicted before you can try to take matters into your own hand, or even law enforcement can take matters into its own hand. So again, everyone who's a property owner out there, if you see a squatter, get on it immediately before these folks get any rights. And if you tell a squatter to leave and they don't leave, don't take the law into your own hands. Call the police. It might take them a while to get there, but they'll eventually get there. And then they'll take not the law into their hands. That is their role in society, is to enforce the law. So you don't want to be in a position where you're physically trying to remove a squatter yourself. Because if something goes wrong, if they won't move and then you're pushing them and then punches get thrown or worse, that is not how you want the system to play out. By the way, the same thing with the store. I mean, most store owners tell their employees, if someone's stealing the stuff, don't stop them. You know, your dad went beyond what store owners would tell people who are committing crimes in their presence. Don't run after them because, you know, God forbid, you know, they pull out a gun or a knife and they stab you. And all you're trying to do is stop the you know, money or property from being stolen. It's not worth your life, or it's not worth getting harmed or injured. So what I would say is that we need the DA's office to make sure that if the police bring those cases to the DA's office enforces them. And that will send the message to the squatters that if they want to go ahead and break the law, there will be consequences for their actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. My family has experienced a lot of this, but frankly, it's pretty average for just, you know, the average LA person. And I mean, I have another one too. So my house was broken into by a mentally ill drug user, tweaker guy in 2020. And he was never arrested or even caught. And when we pushed for justice, there was just a lot of passivity from the LA Police Department. And I mean, was that passivity possibly coming from above, like from the district attorney and just a lot of promoting apathy in the lower level police departments?
Well, it's interesting. When someone broke into Mayor Karen Bass's house, supposedly someone who is, you know, a drug addict, as they now are admitting that they were in the midst of using drugs, the police jumped on that one. The DA's office made it clear they're going to prosecute. And there's been this sort of, I call it almost a media exception to George Gascon's lenient policies. So in other words, if the media focuses on a particular case, then all of a sudden George Gascon's doing his job and enforcing the law because he wants to look tough when the media is looking. But the media looks at a fraction, small fraction of the number of cases out there. To give you an example, when a young white guy was driving over 100 miles an hour and killed 4 students at Pepperdine, this is on the PCH, you might have read about this, you know, that case is being handled as a murder case, you know, a serious homicide case. When you had a guy driving in South LA 100 miles an hour, kills 3 African-American women, all of a sudden that case is not being handled, but it's outside the media. That case is not being handled in bringing the harshest charges, or at least what I would say are the most appropriate charges for that wanton, effective murder, that reckless indifference to life the guy who was driving the 100 miles an hour exhibited. So again, in Karen Bass's situation, sure, the DA has done his job. But in any ordinary situation, probably dealing with even the folks that dealt with your house. I mean, I had my house broken into. My mom's house was almost broken into. I mean, we have now friends and neighbors who had never had their house broken into or their cars broken into for decades, that under George Gascon's lenient policies, the criminals think they can get away with it. And for the most part, unless the media is looking, they're right.
So you sort of touched on this prior or a little before, but many of the people in my generation aren't getting educated about the lower level justice system, or here in LA particularly. There's been a lack of education there. So what are you going to do to be able to educate these people before they even get in contact with the justice system?
You know, what's interesting is that it's easy to pretend that the criminal justice system doesn't matter for your life when everything's going well. You know, when you're not the victim of a crime, when your family's not the victim of a crime, when you don't see, you know, homeless people with serious mental illness or drug addictions, you know, right on your doorstep or in your community because they're off in Skid Row in an isolated part of the community. So it's easy to stay, we'll call it uninformed. But what I think is happening is that as these problems are confronting young people right in their face, they can't avoid most of what's going on that's the byproduct of our criminal justice system. It's going to force them to actually get informed, whether they like it or not. Because if they don't get informed, they're going to be looking at a situation and have no way to process it. So they're going to want to understand, okay, why is this happening and what we can do about it? because otherwise they're going to be victims themselves. And at that point, in some ways, it's almost too late to be asking these questions. So what I've seen with young people is that if I can get to them and explain to them those questions, how did this come to be, and what we can do about it, what they can do about it, it goes a long way. And part of it, strange enough, is actually the voting for the person they want as district attorney. The person who will be in charge of all these prosecutions. George Gascon has one philosophy, and that's a philosophy of decarceration. That he believes that if you tell criminals you're not going to jail, that's somehow going to make us safer. I believe in proportional and smart accountability. It's just a different philosophy. It's not mass incarceration, but it's smart and proportional accountability. And young people have to understand that if I'm in charge, the 180,000 criminal cases that the DA's office does will be done differently, and hopefully in a much better way to promote their safety. Or they can stay with George Gascon and have 4 more years of what they've experienced for the last 3.5. So voting turns out to be a tangible thing that people, certainly 18 and older, can actually do come November 5th. And that could be, if nothing, the first step they show to actually taking ownership of their own community.
Very good.
Yeah, and so this is more of a personal one, but so when I was 17, I got...
Oh, no, not another...
yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
I apologize. No, anyway.
No, don't apologize.
So when I was 17, I broke the law, and then the officer was telling my parents to just, let me off the hook, basically, and my dad had to push for them to, throw the book at me, basically, and give me consequences so I would learn. So that attitude towards me was very, take it easy on her. In contrast, though, he's my now husband, but he also broke the law. He's Filipino and from, single mom household. And he broke the law as well, but the courts treated him very differently. He was on house arrest and he got put on probation, and our crimes weren't really that different. So where do you think this attitude, what should the district attorney see when it comes to Gen Z and different circumstances, and how to, when they commit a crime, how to handle that?
A great point. And to the extent that George Gascon has done anything productive, what he has done is he's highlighted a lot of the problems of the system. Those problems have involved over decades systemic racism, and parts of that still exist even today. Where I disagree is not his highlighting the problems, which has served a useful function, but his solutions. Because his solutions are basically going away from a notion of accountability, something, again, that parents teach their children. If you commit this crime or take this act, there will be consequences. And if the consequences, the line moves. If you tell your kids your curfew is 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever it would be, let's say 10 p.m., and you come home at 11 and nothing happens to you, and you do it the next day and nothing happens to you, then you're going to come home at midnight now. And then if your parents say, well, you broke your curfew, say, well, not really, because it's not really a curfew. It's sort of a suggestion. And that's the problem with accountability. If you set a line, and that's what laws are designed to do, the law needs to be consistently and fairly enforced. It shouldn't matter if you're Black, white, Latino, Asian, from any religion, from any sexual orientation. It shouldn't matter. That whole notion of justice being, Lady Justice having a blindfold on. That's the idea. So again, your situation and your husband's situation with identical facts should have an identical result or very close to it. And the fact that it didn't may or may not indicate certain biases in the system that have to be taken into account. And if prosecutors are doing their job correctly, they will take that into account. In fact, there's something that came on the books about 2 years ago called the Racial Justice Act. And it basically says that defendants can raise the issue not only of explicit bias against them, but even implicit bias. So if you can show, for instance, that more Blacks have been arrested for a particular crime than whites, that there could be this notion that there's an implicit bias, even though you can't prove it in any one case, you can prove it as a group, that then should be used to their benefit to say that they're not being treated equally. Because again, if people, no matter where they come from, if two people commit the same identical crime and have roughly the same backgrounds, they should receive roughly the same punishment. And if that's not happening, the system needs to fix it.
So recently, we saw what happened in the colleges with the pro-Palestinian protesters, and there was a clash, I think you saw, I'm pretty sure, at UCLA with the pro-Palestinian between the Israeli, and all that stuff went down. But I was personally there reporting, and I got to see everything firsthand, the violence from both sides. But I know that currently the mayor said that there's going to be investigations to look into everything. But if all these cases and of these college students came up to your office, how would you handle that?
Certainly. So let me start with the fundamental principle that the First Amendment needs to be fully protected, that people should be able to say whatever they want, even if I find it highly offensive, that they have the right to say it. But there are restrictions called time, place, and manner. The society can regulate when you say it, how you say it, and where you say it. So in other words, that you can't go ahead in a neighborhood with a bullhorn at 2 a.m. every morning and just scream out as loud as you want, whatever you want. Those are the time, place, and manner restrictions. So in a college campus, you can set up places where people can, again, scream to their heart's content, say highly offensive stuff, and you have to protect that. But when words turn into illegal action, when you go ahead and you actually start to trespass and you're in places that the university has said you cannot be any longer because they're public thoroughfares, when you engage in vandalism, when you engage in other types of illegal conduct, you shut down a freeway, as they did. You shut down an airport, parts of LAX. Now those words have turned into illegal conduct, and that's where the DA comes in. And the DA has to say, look, the minute it becomes illegal conduct, we will prosecute. Again, we will come up with a proportional punishment, but we're not going to pretend you didn't commit a crime. And if you recall back in the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers were fully prepared to engage in civil disobedience, knowing that they were breaking the laws because part of their issue was that the laws were unjust. But they would sit there and agree to be arrested and walk to the jail. They didn't fight the police. They didn't, engage in aggressive civil disobedience. It was peaceful civil disobedience. And they understood that if they're breaking the law, part of the consequences, they were going to be arrested. That's not the case today. A lot of these protesters or these people engaging in this illegal conduct, they fully expect that DA Gascon's going to do what he's always been doing, which is just letting people off, not holding anyone accountable for their actions. So again, what I would do as DA is fully promote the right for the First Amendment, speech in the appropriate time, place, and manners. And again, let it rip. You can say whatever you want to say. But the minute it turns into illegal conduct, we'll make it quite clear that the laws will be enforced.
Well, it's very good that you highlighted the First Amendment because obviously that's one of our rights. But then also needs to be justice for violent crimes. So that's pretty good. But Tara?
One final thing on my perspective. So
not another crime.
As a young Hispanic woman, I kind of fear downtown LA. I mean, I worked at DoorDash. I'm a mother, so I worked part-time at DoorDash. And, every time I go to downtown LA, I get flashed, by someone. So every single time. And not to mention, somebody pulled a gun on me one time when he came out of a tent and he had a gun and I drove away. That person didn't get their burger. So, but when it comes to the flashing issue and the mental illness, and I mean, we worry about them, we care about them as people, but so how do you protect people like me?
So again, George Gascon is not interested, unfortunately, in protecting people like you. he is willing to allow crimes. And part of what you just described actually is a crime. It's a misdemeanor. It's a low-level crime, but he has said he won't prosecute most misdemeanors. And so what it is, those crimes fit under a bucket called quality of life crimes. Because effectively when someone flashes you, obviously pulling a gun on you is a more serious offense, or is engaged in, you'll see small meth deals going on in front of you, or people looking like the Walking Dead, or they'll light fires in the middle of streets that can get out of control. Everything I've just described, it can be criminal activity. But if it's low-level criminal activity, Gascon says we're not prosecuting it. What I would say is to the police, you hold people accountable. And if it means that someone is engaging in a quality of life crime, that they need to have punishment proportional to that. Because otherwise, what we create is back to this broken windows idea. We create a culture where people could just feel that they can get away with it. So if they can get away with flashing you and pulling a gun on you, it's not a big leap to then go up to you and say, give me all your money or I'll shoot you, or go ahead and strike you. Or with this mental ill woman who dealt with your father's friend, stab someone. This progression of a spiral of lawlessness is real. But just as the spiral can keep spiraling out of control, so too can we try and bring that spiral under control, which is going back and telling law enforcement that the DA's office will prosecute these crimes. So go do your job. And then hopefully what happens is that people understand that if you do this, you do these actions that are criminal, there's going to be consequences for it. The goal is they won't do them anymore. And if it's someone's mentally ill, they'll have to get into a mentally ill facility, or else if they keep committing crimes, they'll end up in jail. Sadly, the LA County jails have thousands of homeless people in them. They are the largest homeless shelter in all of LA County, which means that they're one of the largest homeless shelters in the entire world. This is the LA County jail system. It's not a good shelter. It doesn't have the services that the mentally ill and people with a substance abuse addiction require. But that's where society, that is the burden that they're giving to the criminal justice system if they don't provide adequate mental health resources or substance abuse recovery resources for people with addictions. So hopefully we can get all parts of society working on this problem. The DA's office and law enforcement are just a small part of the solution. They have to work with the government. They have to work with nonprofits. They have to work with all different parts of volunteers who are willing to deal with this effort. The one thing I'm absolutely convinced is that if law enforcement plays no part, this is just going to keep cycling and getting worse and worse and worse. And George Gascon sadly just doesn't get it. So hopefully, come November 5th, there will be an election. I have a different philosophy than George Gascon. One I believe can actually bring safety back into our community. It's not going to be immediate, but we will change the culture, and with changing the culture, we'll change the results. And so hopefully, I don't know if you have 3 more stories in your notebook. Hopefully, we'll stop the stories. We'll stop you being a victim and your family being victims of crimes. And I'm not going to ever be able to eliminate all criminal activity. But hopefully we can go back to 2014, which was considered our safest year in the last 50 years. We don't have to go back 30 or 40 years. We just need to go back 10. And that will be the goal.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm done with all my questions through that. So we can go on to the next round of questions. So Gen Z likes a lot of authenticity, right? So, but along with that, we like a lot of silly little things. So we're going to throw at you
not the
some
Bobo again.
very, no.
More Bobo.
No.
Okay.
But we're going to throw at you some very rapid fire questions. So
All
yes
right.
or no, or just pick this or that. Okay.
Fair enough.
So they're a little silly, but people like to know these things about people. So
Which Jonas Brothers, my favorite? Okay.
we can know that too. I'm just kidding. Okay. First
remember all
off,
3. Okay.
coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee.
Flour or corn tortilla?
Ooh, good one. Always a mix. I get one of each.
Great. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Salty
And not only dogs, my beautiful Labradoodle.
Oh, What name?
His name is Lou, spelled Lieu, because we got him in lieu of having a life during the pandemic.
Look at that. I love that.
Salty or sweet?
Sweet.
Okay, Star Wars or Harry Potter?
I'm sorry?
Star Wars or Harry Potter?
Wow. Star Wars movies, Harry Potter books.
Okay, nice.
Menudo or pozole?
Wow. Menudo.
Oh wow. Okay. That's a good.
I'm going there. I'm going there.
Okay, favorite sport?
Tennis.
Tennis. Okay.
Sports team?
Probably anything anything LA, but I'd probably start with the Lakers/Dodgers.
Okay. So this is a really big question, a trending question. Are you Swiftie?
Of course. I have a daughter, please. I think she owns every Taylor Swift record or close to it.
Wow.
And certainly went to the concert. We went to a concert like 10 years ago. Okay. So, I mean, we're like OG Swifties. So, I mean, we're not these recent Swiftie craze people.
Good.
What's your, have you seen Batman?
Which ones?
Any of them?
All of them.
All of them. What's your favorite one?
The Dark Knight.
And
That's the classic.
yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's relevant. A lot of these stories I tell, it feels like Gotham City under the current DA.
True.
It sort of does. I've heard those people say that. Now, what's your favorite book?
Wow. The favorite book. It's interesting. My most recent favorite book would probably be something they just made a Netflix limited series called The Three-Body Problem. It's by one of the most famous Chinese sci-fi writers. It's actually a 3-book series. It blows your mind kind of books. So I would go for recent books. I'll go with that.
Okay, yeah, I did see that one. That's the new Netflix
It's on
series.
Netflix.
I did watch a little bit of that. Do you like that one?
The movies are never as good as the books. This book, this writer has an imagination that it literally will blow your mind. You got to read all 3 books.
Do you have a favorite classic book?
A favorite classic book? What has been my classic go-to book? It's funny. I haven't really given that thought. I mean, I'm one of those thriller. I read everything from thriller to sci-fi to nonfiction. What did I read recently that I just finished? Biographies. So I had a client who wrote a autobiography called The Gambler, because he was the largest legitimate sports bettor in the world. Wow. And so he wrote this whole book. So it's funny. I'd have to think as to which one of those many books that I read. But, I like the feeling of reading an actual book. I used to like the feeling of a newspaper, but that doesn't exist anymore. But, one of the things I think that people in your generation are going to miss out is having a wall full of books behind you. And they're like little memories stored in between 2 hard covers. And you sort of remember where you were when you read the book. And the electronic books don't get close to that.
No, they don't. No, books are amazing. Now, Tara, did you have any more of the rapid fire questions?
One more. Favorite brunch?
Favorite
Brunch. What's your favorite thing for brunch?
All right. So I happen to have some weird allergies. I'm allergic to eggs, nuts, seafood, chocolate, and beer. So my favorite brunch are eggless pancakes. It's actually called the Trainer's Special. It's eggless pancakes, scrambled tofu, fruit, and a bagel.
Oh, that's very vegan, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good place to be if you're vegan.
It sounds good. Now, very final question. Is there any words of advice that you would have for Gen Z? And just the last word.
Yeah. So the words of advice are get involved. Probably the best advice I was ever given was a saying that 90% of life is about showing up. And the problem that I find with Gen Z is that they get stuck on their phones very too often, and their world gets created inside of a phone and inside of communications where they don't touch real people, and see the reactions in real time. And so where you get the opportunity to show up. And I love the fact that you went to the UCLA rally, because so many people will just go ahead and say, oh, I was sort of there because I watched it on social media. It's not even close. So what I would tell people is very often put the phones down. If I go to one more restaurant and I see 4 Gen Zers sitting there all on their phones, literally not talking to each other. They even might be texting each other for all I know, but they're literally not talking to each other for good portions of a dinner. I'm thinking like that's insane. They're missing out literally on life. So I'd say put the phones down, talk to each other, go have the experiences, touch, feel, get off the virtual world, and you'll find that this is an amazing world. And then vote.
Yes, voting, so important. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I know it's very busy on the campaign trail, but we wish you the best of luck.
Great. Thank you very much.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Excellent.
Yeah, just say your website where they can find you.
Sure. It's www, and apparently I don't have to say that anymore, .Nathan Hochman, Nathan, and then my last name is Hochman.com. So
Okay.
NathanHochman.com.
And any social medias?
Everything related, well, let's see. Twitter feed is Nathan Hochman DA. The Instagram is Nathan Hochman 4DA. I'm trying to remember these. It's Nathan Hochman with the word DA somewhere in it.
That sounds all right.
We're on everything from TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and everything else.
That sounds great.
Fantastic.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
you.
Okay.
And you can find us at 180shift.com.
There you go.
.org.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We'll fix that later.
180shift.org.